Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. A review by Louis Hillenbrand. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was a leading intellectual mind of Europe during the Age of Enlightenment who not only became known as the father of German literature, but also made breakthroughs in the domain of science. He was born in 1749 and raised in Frankfurt in a household devoted to law, which he studied officially in Leipzig while being taught other skills such as drawing, dancing, and fencing at home. He quickly became enamored with literature, starting with Homer. It is said that it was his discovery of William Shakespeare's tragedies, however, that ignited his passion for writing. This newly found passion, coupled with his growing interest in history and religion, came to be the recognizable standards of Goethe's genius throughout his works, and the way they have been interpreted to this very day. During his studies, he began writing poems inspired by his love interests. After finishing his studies in Strasbourg in 1771, he started his career as a lawyer in Frankfurt, where he began publishing in a periodical. However, because of his desire to revolutionize jurisprudence and his fiery temperament, he lost many cases. He then relocated to Wetzlar in Hessen, where he had greater success. It was there, in 1774, that his first literary breakthrough came to fruition, Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, The Sorrows of Young Werther, an epistolary novel based on his own experience of unrequited love for Charlotte Bouffe. It was one of the pioneering works of Sturm und Drang, Storm and Drive, a pre-romantic literary genre focusing on expressing deep emotions. It is said that so popular was the story that many young men who found themselves in similar unrequited love situations as the protagonist in Goethe's novel actually ended their days out of sheer despair. Nevertheless, his notoriety grew, and in 1775 he was popular enough to be invited at the court of Duke Karl August von Sachsen-Weimar-Eisenach in Weimar. He held a series of important offices until he was ennobled in 1782. Between 1786 and 1788, he went on a long voyage across Italy and Sicily in particular that contributed greatly to forming his philosophical and aesthetic inclinations. He became enthralled at Roman and Greek architecture in particular. It was also during that journey that he met occultist Alessandro Cagliostro. Much is speculated about what he learned during his stay in Italy, but he eventually returned to Weimar, and from 1793 onward, dedicated the rest of his life to literature. Goethe's literary output was both groundbreaking and revealing about human nature. He is famous for having spearheaded at least 3 literary genres that are typically German. First, his The Sorrows of Young Werther contributed to forging the Sturm und Drang genre, as well as subsequent romance novels of the time. Second, in 1795, he also published a short tale called The Fairy Tale of the Green Serpent and the Beautiful Lily, in the fashion of the classic German Märchen. Although it was meant as a symbolic tale about the human psyche, it provoked a resurgence of interest in German folklore as a response to the Napoleonic Wars and the hegemony of French culture on the continent. Then followed the remarkable literary production of fairy tales by authors like Friedrich de la Montfouquet, who, like me, was of German and Norman descent, and most notably, the Grimm brothers. Even though the fairy tale genre was used as a response to the domination of French culture on continental Europe, this particular genre was nevertheless a favorite among French readers. The difference between French and German fairy tales is that the former tend to be more optimistic and light in nature, whereas the latter tend to be more sober and bittersweet. Third, his novel The Apprenticeship of Wilhelm Meister became one of the very first coming-of-age novels of the typical German tradition of Bildungsroman. Aspects of all 3 genres that Goethe promoted to shape can be found in his most famous work of literature, one of the central plays of continental drama, his masterpiece, Faust. In this play, published in 1808 and revised in 1831, we see the core of Goethe's interest in the duality of man's psyche. Alongside the aforementioned authors of fairy tales, Goethe's Faust explores the concept of the Nachtseite, or night side of human nature. Even though he always considered himself a classicist, his interest in the darker side of man encouraged the so-called Schwarze Romantik, or dark romanticism, which flourished as a grim reaction to the idealistic values of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. It is the classic story of Heinrich Faust, a learned alchemist who, after many years of studying the far reaches of the known world through the lens of all the sciences, becomes disillusioned with the fruitlessness of his intellectual pursuits. He resorts to magic to eventually attract the demon Mephistopheles, with whom he makes a deal that his soul will serve him in hell forever if he can be young again, experience the life of the senses, and find happiness after his ceaseless research has made him old and depressed. After having Faust sign the deal, Mephistopheles takes him on a magical journey of his desires. Further along his pleasure-seeking adventures, Faust eventually meets Gretchen, with whom he falls deeply in love, and seduces her with the help of Mephistopheles, who busies himself with distracting her neighbor. She then has her mother drink a sleeping potion so she can have privacy with Faust. The mother dies from the potion, and after Gretchen discovers that she is pregnant, her woes are made worse by her brother Valentin, who confronts Faust in a duel. Faust defeats and kills Valentin with the help of Mephistopheles, and they escape. As Gretchen is accused of the murders, Mephistopheles tries to divert Faust by having him witness the witch festival of Walpurgisnacht, but Faust insists on saving Gretchen, even though she refuses and gives herself to the mercy of heaven, which cries out that she is saved. The play ends with Faust fleeing the dungeon where Gretchen is held prisoner, following Mephistopheles, presumably on yet another series of endless short-lived pleasures. Goethe's Faust is one of the most well-known and celebrated plays in all of the Western canon. It had an immeasurable influence on artists of the 19th century, especially musicians. Indeed, many composers such as Hector Berlioz, Charles Gounod, Arrigo Boito, Franz Liszt, and even Richard Wagner composed music about the play. It presents the very characteristics of 19th century art and culture, in my opinion, with the rejection of the Enlightenment making way for a growing interest in man's emotional and spiritual life, from expressing feelings and nationalism to the discovery of new sciences and occultism. It also predates psychoanalytical explorations of the subconscious mind and man's dark side through the character of Mephistopheles, the tempter and the bearer of forbidden knowledge. In his Transformation, Understanding the Three Levels of Masculine Consciousness, American Jungian psychotherapist Robert A. Johnson uses the classic literary characters of Don Quixote, Hamlet, and Faust as representations of the psyche's development from childlike innocence to a fallen state of restless questioning, to a holistic acceptance of man's total inner being. The sequel of the play, Faust Part 2, is a more allegorical and less accessible work in which Faust continues his initiatory journey until he arrives at a compromise between Mephistopheles and heaven, which, according to Johnson, represents how one is to observe oneself fully and become acquainted with one's light and dark sides in order to find inner harmony and accept one's being and life itself for what it is, thus finding redemption. I find this interpretation to be truly valid and interesting in revealing the depths of Goethe's classic, which, even to this day, remains a pivotal work that led an entire continent to meet its dark side and its destiny, for better or for worse, an ethos that has been carried forward by thinkers and artists alike such as Rudolf Steiner and Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau in his 1926 silent film adaptation. In our modern context in which we meet the shadow yet again, it stands to reason that this timeless play should be rediscovered, so that we may learn more about ourselves, and for the world to be connected to itself again. In conclusion, Goethe's Faust is an outstanding work of art that is highly revealing about the literary context of the late 18th century and early 19th century, as well as the artistic inclinations that would follow its publication. It is among my favorite literary classics of all time, and one of my favorite books as well. A soul that shaped the literary and nationalistic spirit of an entire linguistic population, left his mark on an entire continent, and stands among the most brilliant minds of Western civilization at large. A genius who will forever appear to man to remind him that there will always be more to know about himself than he might believe. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please feel free to comment below to tell me your thoughts, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel for more content of the like. I wish you all a wonderful day and hope to hear from you soon.